at the University of Massachusetts, and very, very honored and happy to be here today to host this session. So the session is being recorded. For those of you online, if you want to raise a question, you can put it in the chat. I'll be keeping track of them. The agenda for today is we'll have a presentation of about 25 minutes. And then I'll raise a question. I'll probably focus on one and then leave time for other people to raise questions, and then we will close. Okay, so I will let you have at it.
All right, thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Cool. Can everyone see this okay?
Yeah.
Oh, I see some familiar faces. Well, welcome everyone. On behalf of my friends and colleagues, Mike Maune, who's at MIT, and Ryan Miller, who's at Kent State, and I'm Josh. I'm at Siena in upstate New York. I want to thank you all for being here, for attending, and also thank Sabrina for hosting us today, and of course Meg for being our conversant. This presentation is the culmination of about 8 years, we think, of discussions and work together, and we've been able to have the fortune of presenting at some conferences. Many of you have given us feedback along the way at AAAL, at ESFLC, and other kinds of venues. So today's presentation, we're going to present, it's going to include a presentation of some results of an experiment that we were able to do recently. So to frame our discussion today, we point out that one of the critiques of SFL is that it has by and large lacked testing of its theoretical claims, particularly beyond text analysis. Christopher Butler is one who is just one example of this type of critique. He said the problem is that once formulated SFL hypotheses tend to be reinterpreted by practitioners of SFG as accepted fact, rather than submitted to rigorous testing and modification, or even outright rejection. And so what we hope to accomplish today, prior to opening the floor for discussion, is threefold. So we going to talk a little bit about why we should do experiments in SFL, how we did our experiment, and what evidence did we find for supporting or challenging some SFL hypotheses that we tested. So we're going to begin with the first question: why should we do experiments in SFL? Well, the idea of testing SFL's generalizations is, of course, not new. In fact, Halliday suggested doing so in his own work. And this is just one quote that kind of exemplifies the spirit of what he discussed. He said, describing a language is a process of generalizing from the analysis of textual data. The outcome of this process is a description of the system of the language, and we keep testing such descriptions by deploying them in continued text analysis and by applying them to different tasks such as language education or natural language processing. Despite Halliday's suggestion that testing our theoretical claims is a worthwhile endeavor, there are some limitations in testing those claims based mostly on text analysis. And we've seen such critiques even within the SFL community, not just outside, like the quote that we saw earlier with Christopher Butler. For example, Fontaine and Wegner, as recently as 2023, wrote, it's however fair to say that much of SFL research has been based on text analysis, and this may well qualify as empirical or observable investigation, but we might ask whether or not the theoretical categories which underlie the analyses are truly valid and or reliable. Heilman gives us more detail as to the limitations of text analysis when they say, while researchers in other paradigms have started to search for evidence for the psychological reality of a multitude of linguistic concepts experimentally, SFL has mostly steered clear of a psycholinguistic validation of its very own categories. Thus, within SFL, there's no explicit account of the psycholinguistic reality of its own concepts, and thus it lacks evidence that goes beyond the usefulness of the theory's categories in text analysis. One issue with text analysis is its potential for circularity in its explanations of linguistic phenomena. Cognitive linguists such as Min and her colleagues have pointed this out in their work. For example, in one publication, they write, text analyses alone cannot answer the question of whether the observable discourse contexts indeed correspond to some unobservable discourse functions. No matter how brilliant and intuitively satisfying the analysis, and how carefully features of a text written or spoken, monologue or dialogue, are enumerated and counted, then analyst is presuming on the basis of the text itself, often reasonably, but still only presuming, that certain information is new or old, topical or focused, backgrounded or foregrounded. Experiments are the only way to climb out of the inherent circularity of text-based definitions. So here, Min and her colleagues suggest that experimental designs can help discourse analysts out of the trappings of circularity. And this is just a visual representation of Min's points from the previous slide. Keep that for there for just a second. So what we want to avoid in our work is the temptation to say that we should trust the theoretical underpinnings of SFL because certain scholars have told us to do so or have told us so. For our work, this could mean that a grammatical construction that we see in a text realizes a particular unobservable meaning because someone who we greatly admire says so. And for those of us who are pursuing SFL as an applicable theory, one that most of us use in the context of our classrooms to enrich our students' understandings of how we mean, help our students become better communicators, etc., what evidence would increase our confidence in SFL's theoretical underpinnings? So I'm going to hand it
Josh,
over.
could you go back one slide there? I just wanted to add a comment here.
Yeah.
I think the main reason that we're interested in, or one of the main reasons we're interested in this question of increasing confidence or decreasing it is that SFL has, made efforts to get uptake in applied contexts like schools. And sometimes the pushback, there's been pushback for a variety of reasons, but but as we saw in some of the critiques, part of the pushback may be coming from this lack of experimental evidence to support the claims of the theory. So we teach some kind of pedagogized version of the theory, but the question is, do we have the scientific backing that we would for other fields like physics, biology, or other social sciences, psychology, sociology? Do we have the same level of evidence? I think it's definitely part of this discussion to explore whether or not we need it or not. But we're stipulating right now that we think we should try to increase the level of evidence by introducing a kind of an experimental program here. So Josh, you can move on. And we're going to talk. I'm going to kind of outline the methods as well as I can here. As Josh said, this was 8 years. I've been saying 5, but no, it's 8 now. It's 8. It was 5 when we first presented. Josh, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, please. So how did we do our experiment? We looked to other models, as we mentioned. Lisa Min and her colleagues have been doing work like this in cognitive functionalism since the 1970s. They have a really great experiment that we're not going to show here, but I replicate it in my classes that teaches known to new. It's really great. I might share it a little bit later. In SFL, our experiments have primarily been testing the teaching learning cycle, that pedagogy, and the experiments are not necessarily testing SFL theory. In other contexts, the SFL theory has been used to design stimuli for testing other theories like psychological or neurological theories. This is Trevisan and Garcia in Italy and Argentina. But the closest to what we're trying to do here, test SFL theory, has, as far as we know, only been done by Nick Moore the UAE in 2008. We became aware of his work when we presented at the European SFL during the lockdowns in the pandemic. But our gap that we're filling here is, more kind of beat us to the punch. But we are doing a different design. So he does in a comprehension design. And Josh, if you can do the animation there, we're going to be doing a production experiment. So just briefly, there's two different types. We can go to the next slide, please. There's two different types of functional linguistics experiments. There's a comprehension type experiment where the input is some kind of linguistic stimulus and output is some kind of meaning, usually measured through multiple choice or eye tracking or asking people their interpretation of something. And this is a focus on listening and reading versus production experiments where the input is some kind of meaning and the output is language. And the focus is on the speaking and the writing. And Lisa Min, again, highlights why production is particularly valuable. It's not the only tool that we should have in our toolbox, but it's a good one. Josh, if you can go to the next one. If we want to know the functionality of the speaker, we must study the choices of the speaker rather than the listener makes. So what predictions can we actually test in SFL? We decided to go with the system of mood and speech function. So we may all be familiar with this table in IFG form, but it must have been in all the IFGs. And here we have a set of predictions that more often than not, if we're going to be doing a command, it's going to be in the imperative, as we see here. If we're going to be doing a question, it'll be in the interrogative, a statement in the declarative. The offer, we've got a question, interrogative here, but it could be other options. So we're going to systematize this. We started with this table, but we got a little bit more systematic later on. So this is the set of predictions that we're going to be testing. Josh, can next slide, please. At a high level, this is what our study does. We manipulate an independent variable. That variable is the context of situation of a classroom. So we are interested in figuring out how students and teachers communicate in a classroom to accomplish different speech functions. Recall the speech functions command, offer, statement, and question here. So how would a teacher speaking to a student do these speech functions, and how would a student speaking to a teacher accomplish those speech functions? And specifically what we're interested in is this dependent variable of mood in the lexicographer. And here the relationship is causal in two directions. So the independent variable, the one that we're going to be measuring is this transformation that happens when we when we describe a scenario that calls for some kind of command or a statement or something like that. How does that meaning get transformed into the lexicographer? And we think, infer that this mood then realizes the speech function. But the causal inference that we're able to make from this experiment that we're going to delineate here in a minute is primarily this transformation causal relationship. Josh, we can move on to the next slide here. Oh my God, I messed up the animations here. So we created classroom scenarios to model the speech function and tenor. So our independent variables were speech function, which was a scenario that creates some kind of exigence for an offer, command, statement, or question. And then we also manipulated status and solidarity, specifically status. So for status, Poynton and Holiday have two values for the value of status, and that is inferior or equal or unequal relationships. And if you're in an unequal relationship, you can be an inferior or a superior position. So we needed a bunch of scenarios where we would ask people Okay, here's a scenario that calls for a teacher to give a command. What would you say? Okay, so we needed to create those scenarios. So we brainstormed scenarios, generated more with an LLM. We had some experts check the scenarios to make sure that they were valid. We piloted it 3 times and refined our prompts, and then we pre-registered our hypotheses in the Open Science Forum. So Josh, if you can move on. So you've probably been wondering, what the hell do these scenarios look like? This is what one of them looks like. So you are a student, you have a drink in class, you accidentally spill your drink on your class handout. You notice that the teacher has spare copies of the handout on their desk. You would like the teacher to give you a copy of the handout. What would you say? Okay. And this is a student giving a command to a teacher. And specifically, this is giving a command for a good versus a service. If you want to see the full list of, we had 128 scenarios. That's why we used an LLM. We needed a lot of help. You can check out this link.
Mike, just one quick note here. The participants weren't given this bit of language. They were only given the prompt itself. So they didn't know it was the condition that they were receiving.
That's a good point. Thanks for highlighting that, Josh. All right, so you probably have been thinking about many confounders. Did we control for them? So we controlled for good and service. We balanced those, one per participant per condition. We controlled for the length and structure of the prompt. So every prompt had exactly the same number of sentences and in the same order. We gave them a context. You are a teacher or a student and you're doing X. We gave them an exigence or a problem. For example, a student's pencil breaks. We gave them information needed to accomplish the speech function. You remember you have a pen in your bag. And then we had the critical sentence, a speech function prompt. You want the student to have the pen. And notably here, we avoided using the words command, offer, statement, and question. So we were specifically thinking about what you wanted to do. What's the function here? And then we had a generic prompt. What would you say? And then we randomized the order of these various scenarios so that we could eliminate the possibility that the scenario itself was messing up or causing the results. This is a standard method within linguistics experiments. So this is the set of conditions that the participants saw. So we've got 8 conditions. Josh, if you want to move to the next one. And then the animation. Each participant received 2 scenarios per condition. So 8 conditions by 2 scenarios. Every participant gave us 16 responses, 16 sentences that we asked them to produce. Okay, so what predictions did we make? We made the following predictions based off of 2 texts, IFG and Kate Poynton's work on tenor. And we operationalized 2 key passages for predictions. So this passage from IFG, typically a statement is realized as a declarative and a question as interrogative, but at the same time, in both instances, there are alternative realizations. For offers and commands, the picture is even less determinate. A command is usually cited in grammatical examples as imperative, but it is just as likely to be a modulated interrogative or declarative, as in, will you be quiet, and so on. While offers, there is no distinct mood category at all, just a special interrogative form, shall I, which again is simply one possible realization among many. So you can see those words, typically, those are giving us probabilities here, which is what form the basis of our predictions. And then another passage from IFG, combinations, and this is dealing with the tenor issue. Combinations of tenor values relating to a status and contact correlate with different semantic strategies, open to speakers for demanding goods and services of their listeners, for commanding their listeners. If the status is unequal, with the speaker being subordinate to the listener, the speaker's semantic options are very limited. It is very hard to command a stranger who is of superior status to do something, but there will be certain semantic strategies. Lexicogrammatically, these strategies will be far removed from the congruent realization of command, a clause of the imperative. So just following point in here, bare imperatives can be used both by superiors to inferiors and between equals, but when it's an inferior speaking to a superior, the imperative is not an option for doing a command. So, put more simply, for conditions eliciting a statement. So if they're going to do a statement, we predict the probability that the declarative mood will be higher than all of the other moods. For conditions eliciting a question, we predict the probability of interrogative mood will be higher than the other moods. And then this is where it gets tricky. So from the previous slide, for conditions eliciting an offer, we predict there will not be a statistically significant difference between the probability of each mood. That is, basically all the moods are equally likely, which is what Holiday predicted. And then for conditions eliciting a command, we predict the following. If a scenario asks for what a teacher, a superior, would say, we predict there will not be a statistically significant difference between the probability of each mood. If the scenario asks for what a student, an inferior, would say, we predict the probability of imperative mood being lower than the other moods. All right. And I believe that's it. I think Ryan is going to get us into the remainder of our methods here.
Okay, so what did we actually do? We recruited participants, we recruited 76 participants using the online platform Prolific. It's a site where people can sign up to participate in research studies, and they get paid for doing that. And our 76 participants, we did set a couple of screeners that were self-reported by the participants. We made sure, well, they self-reported that they were native English speakers, and that they had some experience in college. We did that because all the scenarios were about college classroom contexts. So we wanted that to be at least somewhat familiar to people. And they all currently reside in the US. Once we collected the data from the participants, we organized and cleaned the data. We did have to remove 6 participants' data because they did weird things in their responses. Mostly, a few of the participants basically wrote the speech function rather than what they would actually say. So the sample prompt we showed earlier asked, you would like the teacher to give you a copy of the handout, what would you say? Some people said something like, I would ask for the handout, rather than the actual words that they would say. We got rid of a couple participants that were just, the person wrote a couple paragraphs instead of just one sentence. In the end, we had a total of 1,120 responses from the participants, which we then manually coded for mood. We tried to simplify it a little bit by automatically coding it using the UAM corpus tool. That didn't work very well, so we ended up not doing that. But we manually coded them. We normed and resolved difficult cases by consensus. We coded mood based on the position of the subject relative to the finite. We coded all paratactic and hypotactic finite clauses in each response. We coded them for mood. Many of the responses had multiple clauses. We coded all of those. Some things that we agreed on in the end, we treated excuse me as an imperative. Tag questions we counted as interrogatives. And we didn't code things like please, thank you, or vocatives or ellipses. Some responses, like I said, contain multiple clauses. We did code all of the clauses within the response, but we only counted each response once. When all the clauses in a single response were the same mood, we just counted as that mood. But when a response contained multiple clauses with different moods, we coded the clause that most directly realized the intended move prompted by the speech function prompt, which is the penultimate sentence in the prompt. And that's the one we coded for mood. We then statistically analyzed the data. We used a multinomial mixed effects model. Multinomial just means that the dependent variable is categorical. In this case, it was mood, so declarative, interrogative, or imperative with the dependent variable. Like Mike said earlier, our independent variables were speech function, status, and we also looked at the interaction between those. It's a mixed effects model, so we did include a random intercept which was participant, because each participant gave us 2 responses to each condition. So to control for that relationship between them, we put that as an intercept. We analyzed the data in R using Bayesian multi-level modeling. And the results are expressed in terms of probability of a specific mood being produced in a specific speech function condition or combination of speech function by status. They're all probabilities. So what did we find? The evidence we find supporting or challenging SFL hypotheses. So this is for statement, the statement condition. You see the one on the left there is overall, combining all of the responses. And then on the right, it's broken apart into the student condition and the teacher condition. Basically, for statements, most likely to be realized with declarative mood, about 80% probability across the board. That was true in both the student and teacher conditions. Interrogatives were slightly more than imperatives, but that wasn't a significant difference, and both of them were fairly small. For the question condition, similarly unsurprising results. Realized mainly as interrogative mood, very low likelihood of declaratives or imperatives, as we see here. And that was pretty much the same in the student condition and the teacher condition. Gets a little bit more interesting for commands. As you see here, mainly realized as interrogatives. And that's true for the student condition and the teacher condition. But we did see a difference in the likelihood of imperative, which was a lot higher in the teacher condition, as you see on the far right there, compared to the student condition, which was actually quite low. And then for offers, kind of a mixed bag. We see that in the student condition, declaratives and interrogatives were pretty similar, but a lower likelihood of imperatives. In the teacher condition, it's a little bit more mixed, with declarative being higher, interrogative being in the middle, and imperative being higher. And the amount of imperative, basically the big difference between the student and teacher conditions was in the teacher condition, less likely use of interrogative, but higher use of imperative. Right. One interesting thing that we found was thinking about imperative. And we looked at the use of, or the likelihood of imperative being used in the student condition. And we found that the condition where it was least likely to be used in the student condition was for commands. In the student condition, people were more likely to use imperatives to make a statement or to ask a question, or especially to make an offer. And they were least likely to use imperatives for command, which we found pretty interesting, because that's the most congruent one for commands. But we see a big difference in status here, that for the student condition, they seem to have felt least licensed to use imperative for commands. They felt better using imperative to make a statement or make an offer. But when you align the imperative with the function of a command, it was very, very low. So looking at our hypotheses and what we found in the results, For the first one, which is about statement, we predicted that declarative mood would be higher. And Josh, yeah. Very sported. Overwhelmingly relies congruently using declarative. For hypothesis 2, for eliciting a question, we predicted probability of interrogative mood would be higher, and that's what we found. For offers, we predicted that there would not be a statistically significant difference between the probability of each mood. That's not what we found. We did find that for the student condition, declarative and interrogative were higher than for imperative. For teacher condition, it was declarative, then interrogative, then imperative. But the big difference for offers basically between the teacher and student conditions were that in the student condition, they were more likely to use interrogative than in the teacher condition. And one possible explanation for that might be is if you're using interrogative to make an offer, you're saying something like, would you like this, or would you like me to do this, which kind of leaves things a little bit more open to be decided by the listener, um, which might be something that a subordinate role would do towards a superior role. Whereas the other direction from the teacher to the student, you might be more likely to see imperative, which is what we saw. And then for the fourth hypothesis, for conditions eliciting command, for the teacher condition, we predicted that there wouldn't be a difference between the probability of each mood. It's not what we found. We found more interrogative, then imperative, and then declarative. And for the last one, for the student condition and commands, the prediction was that imperative would be lower than the other moods. That's basically what we found. Imperative was particularly low likelihood for commands in the student condition.
Okay, wrapping up here. We think social scientists are fallible. I think one of the big questions that I had when I was in grad school learning SFL is, yeah, but is it possible to be wrong? And I think our experiment provides some evidence that, yeah, people can be wrong. And there might be ways to substantiate critiques. Our experiments show that shows evidence that testing the theory with experiments is worthwhile because it might inform changes to the theory. We don't think experiments should replace qualitative research. We wouldn't have any hypotheses to study or test without the qualitative research. And we need to triangulate our conclusions through triangulate our data to find our conclusions. But the big thing driving this is providing more evidence for what we tell our students. Our students deserve more evidence. They should know their teachers were not sold a story. So thanks, everyone, and we're welcome to listen to questions and hear what you think.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I followed the development of this work over time, and it's just remarkable how well you have honed your terminology, the way you've really worked on the methodology. So it's really evolved in really compelling ways. Just a couple comments, and I think I'll just open up to other people because there are enough here who may have interesting things, and I can follow up with you on my own later. I think it may not be this kind of statistical analyses, but I think there are plenty of studies, particularly within language typology, that are showing the degree to which SFL developed in a way to describe the functions of English. But if you look at current work that I think Martin and I can't remember his colleague's name, they're doing with Korean, they're disrupting all sorts of assumptions in ways that are really good. Not necessarily with statistical analyses, but I think the idea that of questioning and testing it is certainly within the history of SFL as a pretty robust way of approaching a research agenda.
Just to add on to that, we found that, I mean, we in our lit review, we got into the mood literature,
Mhm.
and seems like there's a substantial critique of the English model of mood from Latin American Spanish research.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Um, and I think this idea of the just another comment is the way the balance between qualitative and quantitative research, depending on when you went through graduate school, back in the day, there was only quantitative methods that weren't really suited to emerging how questions. And then there was a real push for qualitative methodology that was very powerful, ethnographies of communication and qualitative case studies that have really been central to my work. Um, but it really is a question of the purpose of the study and where we are. And I think we have so many hows that have been explored that it is time to test some of these things um, quali qualitatively. And it's certainly with a large corpora or an AI tools that we can use, I think there's a growing area. My one question or concern, I wonder if you wanted to speak to this, is um, depending on what you're coming out of, I have found increasingly that the doctoral students aren't interested in quantitative methods as having a balanced research agenda. And often, if you're in a more qualitative department, they'll give you some 14 weeks of like baby statistics that, really belies maybe what you got in high school. So I think we need to look at our doctoral programs and how we're preparing people to take on new questions using methodologies that aren't either or. But I just wondered if you wanted to speak to that.
I'll hand that off to my colleagues who actually have doctoral students. I'm a lecturer, so either
Well,
one of you guys
I,
want to.
I will say, Mike, just in my experience as a graduate student, my interests were mostly qualitative too. And I mean, frankly, one of the challenges of Mike and I starting down this road was that we didn't have as much quantitative training as we needed to answer the research questions that we were asking. And so a lot of that was we hope has been tackled through our own self-study and obviously Ryan's expertise in quantitative research, obviously also qualitative stuff, but it was definitely something that we had to further explore ourselves.
And to add to that, the cognitive functionalist literature is very it's very helpful, and they're a great community. Lisa Men actually met with us.
Oh,
We were fanboying with her, like it was just so cool that she took the time to give us instruction, give us feedback on our designs.
yeah, thank you. And another project I'll just mention, many of you know about I know Maria Brisk will be there and Jagan was there last year, but scholars at the University of Bath, under the guidance of Gal Foley, are collecting enormous amount of data in specific disciplines. And if I understand correctly, the motivation here is to design interventions that then they can analyze changes in students' techs over time. And that's such a great, that would be such a great fit for growth modeling kinds of research that are designed to look at change over time quantitatively. And then if there's qualitative data as well, mixed methods on really to really approach things from multiple angles is really powerful. And I think it's very fundable in certain climates. For a while, IES and other types of grants, we're only really looking at control group, quote unquote, gold standards. I don't buy into all of that, some of those discourses, but if it suits the question and there's the opportunity, it really is fabulous. So now I'll open it up. We have a question here from Holly Graham. Do researchers have any ideas on how to use this study with classroom print literacy? I know the hesitation is just to work with text analysis, but I mean studying written pedagogies develop in mixed language classrooms to see change over time. Again, this change over time question.
I think it would be helpful to know kind of what the causal question is.
Hmm.
I can speak.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, please.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm a classroom teacher, and still to this day just constantly shaping and reshaping my curriculum based on my understanding of SFL and genre. And but there is a little bit of an isolation factor when you're just reading qualitative case studies. It's just the reality of the field. The work is also so intense, right? I've come up with case studies with Meg before that have just taken a lot of work. So there's an intensity to the qualitative research where you learn a lot. And then, and then you have to kind of stand up at these conferences and people say, well, that's not generalizable, right? That's not general. You can't, that's not, that teachers can't, that's not quick enough for grad school, or that's not going to fit into our methods program. But I'm sitting here listening and I'm thinking your tool that you've started to work with, could that ever be reappropriated to look at English, target language English classrooms of 12 and 13-year-olds? So you want to call it seventh grade, you want to call it year six, you want to call it whatever you want to call it, and start just kind of making some bigger decisions about what are effective print literacy practices in the classroom that do show writing growth. And then my second part would be, do you ever see that your tool could be developed to kind of reshape and define how we would measure, scary word for qualitative people, growth? Like, what are we looking for? My rubrics are always based around field tenor and mode, and sometimes we don't look at one, but I always have my students look at audience, content, and cohesion as a way to discuss it. But again, like, I don't know if there's anybody else doing that work or how you could even capture it.
Yeah, Josh or Ryan, do you have any thoughts? I guess I could speak, but if you guys have anything.
Well, so kind of related to that, a few years ago, I did a study with Sylvia Pessoa and Pia Gomez Lake in Qatar. And we looked at we it was genre-based pedagogy, and we did like a pre-post kind of study with we had kind of a control group that didn't receive the instruction. We had another group that did receive the instruction, and we did a corpus study where we looked at features of the students writing in one group versus the other group. And so it was a quantitative study looking at, using corpus methods. So I mean, there is that kind of research.
Get on my mute here. Hold on.
Yeah, you can go ahead, Todd.
Okay, go ahead.
I don't know if that, but you can do that kind of thing where you collect the students' writing and you can do corpus analyses on it.
Yeah, I guess what I heard, Holly, is this question of like measuring what the students are able to do. That's like part of what needs to be operationalized. Like how would you measure meaning potential in a way where you could infer some causal inference that we did this intervention and
right.
they had this particular meaning potential? That I think is a very interesting question. We're at the beginning, so I don't think I have an answer on that, but I think it's a good next step for anyone who's interested in experiments. And I do, yeah, I think Ryan's study there might be one place to at least start as a model.
Yeah.
I know a lot of the stuff in Qatar, they were doing similar kinds of studies where they might be able to do that. Go ahead, sorry.
I really appreciated how you really, really honed in on mood. Like I really, really like you had like an in-depth description of how you were understanding mood, how the literature understands mood at this point, critiques of mood, and then it just got me thinking like that would be something that, that could be something that like if you monitored like 8 classrooms, not hundreds, but 8 classrooms that all did something as intense as that, like really looked at mood or really looked at cohesion or really looked at hypotaxis or whatever, and just kind of started to see like larger scale shifts than the kind of case study. That it just has always interested me. Like how could we take it like out of these little classrooms?
Hmm. There's another question from Megan. I don't know if I mean everybody can read it, so I don't need to read it out loud necessarily. Intrigued by the results and with the
Would it be easy if I say it?
yeah, go ahead, sure.
I was trying
I
to
just
turn
wondered if
spoken
you
into.
were baby juggling. Very cute. I
Uh,
haven't met the
I,
baby, but
oh, sorry. Hello. This is Elliot. If he
Elliot, yay.
suddenly yells, then um,
What a
who's
great
also fascinated
name.
by the talk. Um, thanks so much for that, Ryan, Josh, and Michael. I really enjoyed it. I've been kind of hanging out for someone to do work like this for a very long time. So this is fantastic. Thank you. Um, my question is around the higher status command result where you said, there's an increase in imperatives, but not the equal that you kind of expected from the initial descriptions. Uh, and my question is in relation to Kate Poynton's work, where my interpretation of her work is that the general principle for status is regarding reciprocity of choice. That if you are closer in status, you've got the same kind of choices available. If you're a difference in status, you've got different kinds of choices available.
Mhm.
But then the question, but then what you choose in those small sets of choices, they're kind of it's status. Then is a kind of constraining um, thing. It constrains your sets of choices. What you actually choose kind of gets influenced by a range of different variables like contact. She uses affect as a tenor variable, a range of things. My question is just like how can you, and this is where I'm not a stats guy, so I just genuinely have no idea. How can you how can you take the next step and get more intersecting variables to see how those influences come out? Because I imagine kind of saying straight away that the hypothesis of the imperative with higher status is not supported by this evidence. It can't necessarily be generalized at this stage across all situations, obviously. But how can one take the next step? Um, and are you planning to possibly is the next thing?
So what would be the next step would be um, maybe think aloud. So we would go back to qual methods and ask people why they chose, why they said what they said. And then that might give us more fodder for a theoretical prediction. That's what I would do. But to be honest, mood was a proof of concept experiment.
Mm.
We teach writing. We want to test predictions about genre theory. That's our next, like that's where we're going.
Ah,
And
fantastic.
so we probably won't go down that direction any further, but we definitely welcome it. I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts.
Well, I was just going to add, for comic relief, maybe
Mm.
that one of the other reasons why we chose Mood was because we thought it was going to be pretty straightforward and relatively quick and easy to see if we could do it. And obviously, after 8 years, it didn't turn out to be that way. Uh, even even the design went through lots of iterations because it we originally had wanted to follow Min and her colleagues. She'd use like short comic strips to test her to do her experiments. And we tried that. I had a summer undergraduate research creative arts major who tried to help us design some comic strips, and we quickly realized that it was not we were not artistically challenged, or we were artistically challenged. We were not able to do that ourselves, and it was not going to work to do it that way. So we have ideas for doing something at a different scale with different kinds of.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you. I'm intrigued by the genre patterning that you mentioned as well. Intrigued by it all.
Sabrina, do you want to ask
Yeah,
your
I
question?
can. Yes, so I am intrigued by the technical steps that you as a group had to take to put this into a form that then could be inferenced from, right? Inferentially, like the statistical piece. So my one question was the responses were written. Okay, that's helpful. That I was thinking about that on the mode continuum and considering like what impact that may have had, if any. And it was just sort of rhetorical in my mind. The other question I had for you is, in part of your slides, you talked about when you received responses from students that had multiple, it seemed to have multiple, like a command and offer, maybe there were multiple things going on. You had said something about counting the last one, or counting each, but it all counted as one, something like that. Could you talk more about that decision point and how did you get there?
Right. So basically, some of the responses had multiple clauses that had different
Right.
moods.
Right.
But we only wanted to count each response once because otherwise it would be overly weighted in the data.
Yeah.
And so we had to decide which clause to count.
Mhm.
And that was tough at first, but often the multiple clauses in the response, the participant was just kind of repeating back other aspects of the situation. They weren't actually saying something that was in response to that second to last sentence in the prompt, which was what provided the exigence of or provided the speech function that they were supposed to perform. So
Yes.
the clause in the response that most directly answered that part of the prompt is what we looked at.
So they
So,
might. I'm
oh, go
sorry.
ahead. Sorry.
So they
Yeah,
might.
I want to jump in too. So go ahead, Josh.
They might say something like, "I see that you forgot your pencil today, and you probably need one to do the work we're doing in class. Would you like a pencil?"
Okay.
So the
And
first
those
couple,
first couple of sentences are just basically repeating the situation.
Yes. Or are they? Can I
Well,
just push a moment?
yeah,
Good,
Yes,
for
absolutely.
example, like at
yeah.
what point, like if and it has to be this way, right? Because this is the power of the statistical piece is that we have these categories, but the categories are informed by the theory. And so in a way, is there space for like grounded data pushing the categories or unpacking the categories further? And so like in those responses that were hard to fit or didn't like weren't constrained to one, I wonder if the person was doing that to soften the request, right? Which then acts sort of semantically different. But these are all just, I think
Yeah.
your study
For-
is the basis for all these other things that we are all inquiring about, right?
That's something we talked about before was, for what we presented today, we only counted each response just as one clause, right? But we did, because some of the responses have multiple clauses, we thought before about looking at what combinations people use together
Mhm.
and for what purposes. And that might be interesting to look at.
Mhm.
We're actively writing, and we will be publishing the data set publicly so people can explore the data in that way. I'll just also add briefly that I've seen some of these hard design choices that experimental and quantitative people make who don't have qualitative training,
Mm.
and they make poor choices many times.
Mm.
I'm being generous there. And I think our qualitative training allowed us to make more theoretically and rigorous design choices here. They weren't perfect. We
Mhm.
made trade-offs 100%, and you highlighted one of them.
Yeah.
But I think they were not we weren't just making stuff up here. We were trying to rigorously make
But
choices.
but the combination and how those influence each other, I think, is a really good point. I mean, for example, people might be more likely to use imperative if they soften it with something else first, you know, something like that.
Yeah, I think if you got more into the data, you might set up a whole new set of predictions that you could then test to see if they were generalizable,
Yeah.
if you wanted to.
Jody, do you want to have the final word? We're at 5. And anyone who wants to stay on, I have, so for example, I've got a couple other questions, one that might relate to Holly's and doing these little experiments with your students so they can see it, which could be pedagogical as opposed to research oriented. But Jody, go ahead.
I mean, as I was typing it was basically what Ryan was already saying was I was fascinated when you said you coded excuse me as imperative, and then I can imagine that the excuse me wouldn't have been the deciding coding factor in the end. Like, and intuitively, vibes wise, if you add an excuse me or you don't, it changes the reading of the declarative or the interrogative. I mean, it also makes me think of like from broader context of a teacher, yes, has more power than students in general, but like we've got a whole range of teachers and students and teaching styles and student styles that you can imagine some teachers never using the command and others using it a lot. And yeah, the variables would be variables. So nothing to say more than complexity is awesome.
100%. And these are probabilistic generalizations. We are not determinists in any way. And the generalizations are always going to have not just outliers, but
Yeah.
normal variation, right?
I mean,
So
I will
100%.
just say I got an email as this went on with a student who I had to correct for calling me professor in an email because I'm not a professor, and I told them not to call me professor, and they're replying, but this is what I'm told to call people. That formality, like grappling with international students of what's appropriate formality and hitting them with the impact of when they do use that how that affects the relationship in a ways they may not intend.
Mm.
So
Or they do intend.
tangential, but
Or
like
they do
yeah,
intend. Like they
yeah.
like it distant and they
Well,
like it that
it's
way.
after 5 months of teaching them, when they start to like formally introduce themselves and call me Professor Martin, I'm like, what have I done to offend you? Like that's not the vibe we've got going on in the classroom. Come on.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, whole analysis on greetings to a professor when asking to be admitted into a class. And the choices are really interesting.
that
But
that is one of the areas that when we write this up and do like future research, like one of the applications we took this as a point in a proof of concept study, but once we actually got into it, we're like, well, yeah, this could teach like politeness in relationships with students and teachers, what the likely impacts are going to be. Like there are actual applications here for uh, teacher-student relations, not just for students, but also for teachers.
mhm, yeah. So we are at 5:03. Um, I would love it if anyone wants to stay on and ask some additional questions. And I do have Sabrina and I may have a question for Yagan because you were mentioned before you even showed up. So you might be curious now.
I was going to ask for the recording because I missed the first 20 minutes. So
Yes, that will
I
be
am now
available.
curious.
Yes.
Thank you.
We're
Sorry.
recording it. It's going to be probably posted on the definitely posted on the NASA website and elsewhere. So.
And I think we're happy to share our slides, guys. Our appendices are as long as the presentation. We cut so much.
Do you want to say something about the experiment that you do with students in teaching them something similar to mine? I did something where I said, write an email to a professor asking to get into a course. Well, it was naturalistic data. I collected a whole bunch of them and they were so different. I thought it was fascinating. And
You know what I mean?
and then we talked about, you know, but I wondered what your experiment, and then I've done that over and over as a mini experiment, but just for pedagogical purposes. But I'm wondering if you could say something about the experiment that you mentioned that you do, that Holly might benefit from if she's still here. She might had to go. And Yagen, are you all right staying a bit? If you can't, I'll email you.
I'm here.
Okay.
Yep, I can stick around.
Mike, I'm sharing screen if you want to talk about the. You're muted. Mike, you're muted.
It's the apple and the spoon experiment. And I did it with my students in rhetoric today. I just put a link to the Google form. So it's just it's such an elegant experiment. You give someone a jar, or the participant sees a jar, and then you put something in it. In this case, it's an apple, and you can alternate which order you do this. Put an apple in there, and then ask them what is in it. And this is in German because they did this in German and in English. And then they say, an apple, and then you put a spoon in there, and then say what's in the jar. And the question is, do they say an apple and a spoon, or a spoon and an apple? And that's known to new.
Oh, interesting.
So they will say an apple and a spoon. Or as the case may be, in my experiment, which I just linked to, the spoon goes first. So they say spoon and an apple. And it's not deterministic. And I've done it in, I can't tell you how many classes now, and it has replicated all but 3 times. And the 3 times that it failed, the sample size was like 5. So it was just sample size problems. But it's a very elegant way to teach known to new. And I also note in Min's article, she reviews some of this literature on known to new organization and notes that there's an age cutoff around age 10. And then below that, the studies are split so that there isn't a preference for known to new below age 10. And I say to my students, I speculate this is why children's stories don't make any sense to us, because they are not organizing information in any particular way.
Really cool. Yeah. So Yagen, if I can move to that, but if anyone else has any questions, comments, once, twice.
Just that it was it was a fantastic presentation,
It was wonderful.
and the problem that you started with, which is so cogent and like essential, that we need to find ways to answer to critics that are pointing out these gaps. I think your approach is really needed. So thanks so much for that.
Yeah, really great.